Hola, everybody. Welcome to
Well,
Pull these behind the scenes. One without it. For everybody on YouTube or listening to our podcast, this is episode number 3. I've got Peter as always, and this week we brought on esteemed writer, Scouts Honor, the OZ, David Pepose is with us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. We're glad you can make some time for us.
Oh, 100%. Always happy to make time for you.
So I'm going to start it off with the most pressing question. How's Ruby doing?
She's good. She's in the other room right now. She just barked. I have a puppy.
Yeah, she heard.
She's only 8 months.
Oh, there she is.
Somebody summed it up nicely on Twitter the other day. She likes to bully me when I'm on the phone or on podcasts. Anything that shows that I'm paying attention to someone who's not Ruby. So my girlfriend has her in the other room right now, barking, and we'll see. She, depending on how crazy she makes my girlfriend, Ruby might make an appearance later. We'll see. But yeah, so far so good.
Oh, no worries.
But thank you for asking. I'm sure she appreciates it too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so you've been busy you just moved, you've got a new puppy, and you just wrapped up Scouts Honor. I know you've got round 2 of the OZ coming. Do we have any insight on when we?
Yeah, very soon. In fact, I can say we're 1 page of inks away from being where I feel comfortable rolling out a Kickstarter. So we're putting all the pieces together. We're going to get everything colored and lettered shortly, so we can have a nice long preview for everybody to look at. But yeah, it's coming along slowly but surely. We had some COVID related delays as far as production went. So we're sort of getting everything back on the tracks as far as the art side of things goes. It's been written for a long time. I finished writing that book. I want to say it was a little over a year ago. So it's definitely everything's been laid out. And yeah, the team is really excited to be back in the saddle. And also just, we had, life stuff happen. I didn't expect Scouts Honor to kind of blow up the way that it did. And so I wanted to make sure we gave that book all the attention that it needed and not have kind of 2 books competing with one another. And having some COVID related delays and also some happy things. Our artist Reuben just got married a couple weeks ago. So congratulations to him. So we wanted to make sure,
congratulations to him. Then that's exciting.
Yeah, that he had some time to spend with his beautiful bride. But yeah, we're very excited. So I'm hoping probably in the next month or so, we'll be able to roll something out.
Oh, very cool.
Once we get sort of, it's really just 1 more page that we're waiting for, and then we can get all that colored and lettered and thrown up on Kickstarter, and we'll be ready to go. We've got some really cool covers for the next Kickstarter that I'm so thrilled for people to see. I'll give you a little tease, just a small one, is that Mon House is returning from our last Kickstarter. I don't think it's any secret that his variant cover was wildly popular. It outsold all of our other variants, I think, by 3 to 1. And I've known Mon since my very first book, Spencer and Locke. He always does variant covers for me, and I think Mon really outdid himself with this variant. And you'll know it when you see it. It's very exciting to look at. But we've got a whole murderer's row of talent involved, As I say with all of my issues, issue 1 was the quiet issue. And things are going to ramp up in a very big way as Dorothy and company go on a quest for the silver slippers.
Now, see, that little tidbit there, that kind of blows me away. That issue 1 is the quiet issue, because I think that a lot happened in that first issue of the OZ. I love the lore that you bring into it. Now, are you personally is Wizard of Oz one of your favorite movies? Is there some nostalgia there?
There's definitely some nostalgia. Well, it's funny. I think there's a certain degree of cultural osmosis when it comes to the Wizard of Oz. Everybody's seen the Judy Garland film. That was the thing that rolled out Technicolor. And so, I grew up with it just like everybody else, but I always felt a special connection to it because of Toto. I grew up with Cairn Terriers. Ruby, actually, my puppy is a Cairn Terrier, just like Toto. So there was always that like little extra special connection for me. And then I actually wrote a paper in college on the Wizard of Oz. So I read a lot of the L. Frank Baum books. I compared the Land of Oz to what Stan and Jack did with the Marvel Universe in the 60s. Where we're talking about using different books to build continuity and to sort of build a wider shared universe. And, it was one of those things. It goes to show that you never know what interesting tidbits you pick up over the years that become very useful to you later on. And after my first book, Spencer and Locke, came out, people liked it, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'll keep doing this. And I thought, what are some different genres I could play with? And so I wanted to do a sequel to Spencer and Locke, so that was one idea that came up. I wanted to try to tackle a rom-com because I figured nobody in comics does rom-coms, so that became Going to the Chapel. And I said, I want to do sci-fi and fantasy. So my sci-fi idea wound up becoming Grand Theft Astro, which will hopefully be, knocking on wood, coming out sooner rather than later. We're slowly but surely kind of getting a trickle in on art for it. The book's been written for over a year, so it's like I'm just as impatient as you guys. But I said, fantasy idea would be really cool. And so I wrote down all these just inspirations. That's what I tend to do in general, is I'm like, what are some stories that have played in this wheelhouse that I can kind of draw some inspiration from? So I wrote down things like Harry Potter, like Lloyd Alexander, like Lord of the Rings, and I wrote The Wizard of Oz. And as my cursor was flashing on the word Oz, I was staring at it, and I was like, what if that was an acronym? And so I started thinking of like different words that OZ could stand for, and I realized like, it like the image just kind of clicked immediately, and I was like, oh, this is a war story.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that became kind of the genesis of where the OZ started, and finding Reuben Rojas, that was one of the better decisions I've made in my career in comics, and seeing just the way that he drew the Tin Man, I was kind of like, oh, okay, like we're gonna make this book. We're gonna make this book happen. And so I'm really thrilled with how it turned out.
I really think that Reuben's art style really complements like the whimsical, but yet like almost like tortured nature of these characters. It's like these are familiar characters in unfamiliar situations. And, the way they've adapted to this world that they're living in, I think Reuben really nails that feeling of like whimsical, but also a little bit of dread, because like these flying monkeys are no joke. Like they're not the like cymbal clapping funny things you see in the original Wizard of Oz.
Right. Well, it's funny because so Reuben he's really the first and only artist I've ever done this with. Usually I've got a high concept already kind of laid out, like a specific story that I'm trying to cast. And so I look specifically for that one story. I had a little bit of a war chest of concepts, and I saw Reuben's art, and I was so blown away that I basically said, Reuben, pick. I said, whichever story speaks the most to you, take it. And I didn't know this about Reuben at the time, and now that I've gotten to know Reuben better, I know this. He was like, two of my favorite genres are low fantasy, like Game of Thrones, and post-apocalyptic. And so he was like, the OZ really kind of fit together like my wheelhouse.
So there you go.
So yeah, he's just a superstar in the making. I'm so thrilled to be working with him on this. And I as I tell him every time he'll listen to me, this is hopefully the first of many projects we'll be working on together. And for anybody who's been impatient with the return of the OZ, just looking at his pages, I can tell you it's going to be worth the wait.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Now you're working on issue 2. Is there more in the future coming? Is that what does that look like?
The plan is to do 3 double-sized Kickstarters. So that will be this will be sort of the middle Kickstarter of the bunch. And then we haven't really made any decisions about collections yet. It's still very early. It's early on.
Right.
I feel like the second and third Kickstarter roll off, then we'll kind of have a better sense of like where things are at and the best way to go about doing this. There will be some sort of collection of the OZ sometime in the future. I just, the question of where and when and through what mechanisms, that's a little bit further out on the horizon. But yes, there will be 2 more Kickstarters for sure, and we've got some really cool stuff ahead for our readers. Boy, I almost spoiled a stretch goal for you guys, but maybe after the show I'll spoil.
Hey, that's all right. You know what? The wait is going to be worth it. I know that for sure. Same as when I first heard of the premise behind Scouts Honor. I always have found it fascinating. Like, what if humanity were to be wiped out and, a Superman comic was the last surviving piece of literature from our entire existence. And someone discovers it and they think that, this was real world. We actually had this Superman. So just the whole premise of this, a scout handbook being the only remnant of humanity that becomes basically a cult like that. Like I heard that and I was just all in immediately. What were you a Cub Scout? Was there any like real life inspiration there? Just like, hey, these would be fun rules to make a religion out of.
There was. So my younger brothers were Boy Scouts. I'm the youngest of 4, and my younger siblings are triplets. And so I always say I was like the crash test dummy baby. My parents didn't really know what they were doing. They were first parents. I didn't really have a ton of extracurriculars to show for it as a kid. Whereas when the triplets were born, it very quickly became, oh no, we need to regiment that schedule as hard as possible because it was like juggling. You had to keep one baby in the air at all times. And so both of my brothers did Boy Scouts for a pretty short period of time. I think they realized very quickly they were not the joining type. But seeing the outside, being on the outside looking in, for them at the time, it was about hanging out with their friends and learning practical skills and the camaraderie of it all. And meanwhile, for me, you see the uniforms and you see the mottos and the bylaws, and you don't have to squint too hard for it to start looking like a cult. And I had been thinking, I consider myself a somewhat spiritual person. I've talked a lot in interviews. I was raised Jewish. That's a big part of my identity. And the idea of tackling something that's a little bit more of a spiritual side, that really interested me. And I saw a show called The Path on Hulu, and that really crystallized a lot for me. That was a show that was kind of about Scientology. It was about a guy who was in a Scientology style cult who he decides to leave, and what happens to him and his family and the cult itself, with this crisis of faith. And I thought to myself while I was watching it, what's the weirdest thing that a cult could use as its Bible? And when that happened, that's when it, like, the light bulb went off, and I thought, oh, Boy Scout manual. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, that could be something really cool.
I love it.
That could really turn into like an interesting story. And thankfully Aftershock went for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are really happy they did, because not only did you get your idea out there, but anytime you're getting memorabilia, distributed with your book, you did something right, and not only that, but like, I know I'll speak for myself, but like those merit badges, like those were something to be sought after, that was such a cool little, cherry on top of this whole thing. Like, yeah, I want a wilderness expertise badge. Heck yeah.
You can thank Steve Rotterdam from Aftershock for this one. I love Steve. He's I think he's SVP of Sales and Marketing, I believe is his title. And I've known Steve for over a decade at this point. I knew him when I was a DC intern. I met him and I met Mike Martz when I was over at DC in 2008. And
I don't think I knew that about you.
Yeah, that was my big break in the industry. Was working on
that's
Batman
awesome.
RIP and Final Crisis and Green Lantern.
Yeah,
Season 4.
David handled some pages and stuff too.
Yeah, I handled some original J.H. Williams Batwoman pages about a year before it came out. So Steve, when Aftershock first greenlit Scouts Honor, I think I saw him at Baltimore Comic-Con shortly after they greenlit it. And Steve, the first thing he says to me, comes up to my table, he's like, well, we have to do merit badges. And I was like, well, you're in luck because that's going to be a big part of this story, is the merit badges kind of being not just sort of the status of rank and what kind of skills everybody has, but they're also sort of keys for Kit to get from point A to point B in certain parts of the story.
Yep.
So yes, that was all Steve's brainchild, and so I was thrilled. It was only a few weeks, I think, before we went to the printer that Steve and Christina Harrington, my editor on the book, she said, "Okay, we need you to write some back matter," and I immediately was like, "Well, let's do the merit badges, and so we can use that to kind of flesh out this world a little bit more and to kind of seed in certain plot points that I was going to introduce later on in the series." It's funny because the timing of Scouts Honor was it was a challenge. It was a real learning curve. I was writing as fast as humanly possible because I didn't want to slow down Luca Casalanguida any. And I was running a semi-relaxed schedule. I think I was expected to turn in a month, whereas Luca was expected to draw a script every, I think, 6 weeks, which is brutal. That is an insane time frame. So by virtue of me writing so fast, I was really far ahead. And so by the time that I was able to be writing the back matter, the series had already long been written. And so I was able to kind of be like, oh, all these things that I didn't really know when I wrote issue 1 in the first place. I can kind of cover my tracks a little bit here and make it seem like I knew what I was doing the whole time. As somebody who doesn't usually like back matter, except when Jonathan Hickman's writing it, I really breathed a nice sigh of relief when I was allowed to do that. It was I think a real net value for the whole book, and I figure I don't want to waste anybody's time with that back matter. So I'm glad people seem to really appreciate it for the world building that I was trying to go for.
Well, I really think that you built a world and characters that really made people want more. Like, I want to know more about this world that exists because, it is fascinating. At surface level, it's very simple. Like the world has ended. There are, the Badlanders and there are the Scouts. But you look a little more into it, who is good, who is evil. And then there's this whole mystery involved, and how did we get to where we are now? And I think the back matter was so successful because this universe warranted investigation. It was something you wanted to turn every rock over and see what's under it.
It's a very different kind of book than I'm used to reading. And it's funny because it's something that I think I stumbled into it more than it being super deliberate. I usually tend to write either very concept-driven or very character-driven. And I think Scouts Honor, while it certainly has elements of both, that I think it's the most fully fleshed out world that I've written. Maybe the OZ being sort of, kind of going neck and neck with that. But it's a different way. With that. Yeah, it's a very different way than I usually write. And I've actually been sitting kind of trying to think, how do I reverse engineer that a little bit? It's just a different way, a different angle of approaching a story. And I feel like the more angles I can figure out, sort of the more versatile I'll be as a writer and the more staying power I'll have. And it was definitely, it's something that I'm still trying to replicate in a lot of ways. Finding a world that's interesting but not overwhelming, that's a tough balance to hit, especially from somebody who usually, if I have a weak spot in my writing, it's usually that like the settings almost feel incidental. I mean, going to the chapel, notwithstanding, like, I mean, the world that they're in, I usually take it for granted that it's the world that we live in. So yeah, being able to really kind of rip ourselves away from where we are now and put it in a place like the world of Scouts Honor. I'm still kind of pinching myself that we pulled it off, but I'm very, I'm glad that people seem to respond to it the way they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, going to the chapel really, struck a chord because my all-time favorite show is Arrested Development, where it's like, so just like the elements of, like, I can tell you were obviously a fan, so like just the elements that like leak its way into like the, like, I don't really even want to be here. And like, oh, snap, like just the way everything kind of compounds and folds in on itself. And it's like, it's almost like this series of unfortunate events. And it's like, I'm given an out, but then it's blown. And so like, I just like going to the chapel was just so fun for me. And like you mentioned before, you kind of carved out something that isn't touched on a lot in comics with like that rom-com feel. I thought that was really cool because that really set that book apart.
Thank you. I can tell you, I can't tell you how many publishers looked at me like I had three heads when I said, hey, I've got an idea. It's a rom-com heist book. Everybody kind of looked at me like I was crazy. So I give Action Labs credit that they knew me, they knew my work, they knew that I would hustle for it. They were like, yeah, like go for it. Because I'm really proud of how that book turned out. And I consider that book really important in my career because, it's funny. The books that have come out so far are in my career have been a little more on the grim side. I always try to have like a redemptive arc, but like we start a little grim, and I get that. But that's not all that I can do. And so I feel like going to the chapel, coming out on the heels of Spencer and Locke, I think a lot of people saw it and were like, wait, this was the guy who did Spencer and Locke? And that's kind of the thing I want to cultivate over my career. I'm working on now. I said on Twitter, I'm working on 9 different concepts right now. And they're ranging from, sci-fi stuff like Grand Theft Astro, which is kind of like a fun, like almost like 80s, tinged, like just high-speed heist in space.
Well, it almost, when I was reading up on that one, it almost sounded like it's like a little bit of Fast and Furious mixed with like some space time travel. And I'm just like, all right, that is absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, I was sold by the premise of that one.
Fast and the Furious. I always say it's Fast and the Furious meets Star Wars meets Back to the Future. I love how the story turned out for that. It's one of those things. I'm just as impatient as everybody else for the book to come out. It's just been sort of a moving target, getting all the scheduling together with the art. But the book is written. It has been written for well over a year at this point. It's just it takes kind of the high speed heisting of like a Fast Five or a Furious 7, which I love those movies, but it really kind of frames it into like that fun, almost like Mark Waid Flash era of time travel. And it starts to add those kinds of wrinkles to the mix. And also, this really strong through line of sibling rivalry and kind of these feelings of insecurity. What happens to, a small time crook when he accidentally rips open a wormhole 7 years into the future and he learns the whole world has left him behind. And sort of, it's this guy trying desperately to catch up. And sort of trying desperately to go back home and to sort of relive the past. And it's I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think when it's always in certain ways writing is a little bit of time travel. Because I'm writing stuff that's not going to be seen for a couple of years, and so for me, I'm like I've done the hardest work. Now everything is just kind of editorial at this point. But yeah, I can't wait for people to get to see that book. I think that's getting to show different sides of what I can do is sort of my long-term goal as a creator.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, it's just the comics industry, not the comics industry, the comics readership, I think is a lot wider than we give it credit for. And I think there's a big diaspora of different readerships. Sometimes it's about genre. Sometimes it's about where you pick up your books, whether it's a comic shop or a con or Kickstarter or Amazon or what have you. And I think every creator should be thinking about how do we bring these people to the table? How do we get as many different constituencies breaking bread together? And so I always say, I want to be Baskin Robbins, I want to have 31 flavors. I want to have something for everybody. And, if the books, are coming out at even a halfway decent clip, and I think they are at this point, that'll happen. I have faith. And so seeing people, kind of respond to going to the chapel, that was really that was the thing that kind of made me realize I could have a longer term career here. I'm not going to just be a one trick pony. I'm going to keep trying to stretch myself and keep trying to do new things. Because that's the only way I'm going to grow as a writer. It's the only way I'm going to have any staying power as a writer. Yeah. And, and it's the only way I'm going to be able to keep readers on their toes and keep them excited and invested. And that's really the end goal here, isn't it?
Well, I think you're getting into that at the perfect time because, in the last couple years, I think we've really been seeing an explosion of interest in independent comics, especially the big two are always there. Everyone loves their superheroes, but, you get out into your indies and you start to be able to explore, these different ideas. And, when you're working with characters that have been around 70 years, you've got 70 years of history and stories that you almost have to adhere to, there's guidebooks, there's rule books.
Almost limitations.
You can't do this with this character. You can do this. So, with independent comics, you're kind of I'm going to build my world. I'm going to fill it with whatever I want to fill it with. So I think you're getting into that at just the right time. And I really love the Baskin Robbins analogy. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. David Pepose, the Baskin Robbins of comics.
Yes. I was saying, I'm working on a sci-fi. I'm working on Grand Theft Astro for sci-fi. I've got a horror concept I'm working on right now. I've got a YA action thing that I'm getting character designs on that are blowing my mind how good they look. Awesome. I'm working on another crime book right now that is almost, it's not as funny as Going to the Chapel, but it's kind of a spiritual successor to Going to the Chapel.
Okay.
I'm working on actually another horror book that is still kind of embryonic at the moment. A comedy, like a flat out, almost like Seth Rogen comedy. And that's not even including Spencer and Locke 3, which I'm sort of very slowly chiseling my way through. It's just a lot of research, and I have a lot of other deadlines that I've been juggling. Everybody keeps saying, where's Spencer and Locke 3? And I have to tell them, I wrote Spencer and Locke 1 and 2 back to back. I've written 6 books since Spencer and Locke 2. So that's why it's I'm trying to grow as a writer and bring that back to Spencer and Locke 3 because that'll probably be the last series we do for that.
Well, I suppose that's almost the double-edged sword of having so many works that people are adhering to is that you're trying to write all these comics and you've got people going hey, is there going to be a continuation of Scout's Honor? Where's Spencer and Locke 3? It's and then one of my favorite little shorts that I've read by you is actually Die Danger Ronin, because exactly. So I mean, it's almost the biggest compliment, but it's also a thorn in your side where it's everyone wants you working on the sequel to their favorite work that you've done, and you've got 3 or 4 works that people are just loving.
Amelia.
It's a great problem to have, and the thing I always say is, I always say, and maybe it's a cop out, but I always say never, because you never really know kind of when you're going to be getting hit with a whole bunch of other ideas that are sort of going to be super pressing. I will say that given how challenging Spencer and Locke 3 has been, it's made me a lot more judicious about like what I'm going to pursue as a sequel and what I'm not, because ultimately the tough thing to convey to a lot of people is that, like, if you liked, say, Going to the Chapel, I'll just throw that out there. I don't think we're planning on doing any sequels, although again, never say never. Would you I think a lot of people say, well, I'd like to see more of the Bad Elvis gang. I'd like to see more of Emily. I'd like to see more of, of Jesse. And my thought is, well, would you rather that, or would you rather a book that hits a lot of the same notes but brings something very different to the table? And so you still kind of have that sort of flavor of Going to the Chapel, but in a very different angle. I think there's some of it is business considerations. I mean, I think you guys know as well as anybody, sales attrition is just a thing. It's gravity. It happens no matter what. And so having a new series versus a sequel, you will usually get more kick in terms of sales and coverage, in terms of reviews for a brand new thing. Also, not to sound mercenary, but just, as far as like, if you ever want to shop something around for intellectual property, having 10 different things versus 10 different sequels, you get to diversify a little more. But at the same time, the thing that I keep telling myself is, I got a long road ahead of me. Comics is not getting rid of me. And so being able to say, oh, well, I can revisit this if there's a good story. I can say, for example, right now there's no plans for more Scouts Honor. I haven't brought it up to Aftershock. They haven't brought it up to me. But at the same time, there's part of me that's like already got an idea in the back of my head. Like, what if I did a story, with Dez? What if I did a story involving like a splinter cell of the cult that was what happened to all the Girl Scouts? It's like an Amazonian Girl Scout cult. You could do a whole lot of things.
Okay. I like the sound of that.
But it's there's only so many hours in the day, and I think that's kind of the challenge. It's just kind of figuring out like, what can I spend my time on without like my brain melting through my ears? And I think that's an ongoing struggle.
Well, because let us not forget that you are also a human being who has a real world life that has other demands of you as well.
Yeah, well,
I think so often we forget that. I think so often we readers tend to forget that, like, you are also a person and live a full life and have family and like loved ones and stuff. You're not just sitting down and writing 24/7.
I'm trying though. It's one of those things. I've been really fortunate that like I have a partner who believes in me. Like my family's been very supportive of my career, and so I'm rolling the dice on myself as a writer, and so I want to make sure that I do it right. I feel there's a real privilege to doing this job, and there's a real privilege for doubling down on this job the way that I have. So I want to make sure that I don't do any of the, and that's kind of an ongoing process for me. Is I'm pretty happy with the quality of my writing. I mean, there's always room to grow, but I think like where I am right now with the number of books I put out right now, I feel happy with the quality of it. I'm working on my speed now. And so it's kind of figuring out, for example, this is like a fun little personal detail is like, one of the reasons we moved is so we could get an extra room so I could actually have my own office. And we're still unpacking it, which is why I'm on my couch right now and not in my office for this podcast. But it's, figuring out how to work smarter as well as harder. It's definitely it's a work in progress, and I think I've been really fortunate that like a lot of more established writers, Zach Thompson, even Donnie Cates, have like told me like, oh no, writing's like hard and it will always be hard. And it kind of takes time to figure out your process and it's always going to be ongoing. Especially seeing Donnie say that, since Donnie is like a machine. I think he's probably.
I mean, yeah, talk about pumping out the pages,
He's probably the fastest and
Right.
most consistent writer in the business I can think of right now. I'd say even James Tynan, who is really hit his stride over the last, I think since DC Rebirth, even he's not putting out quite as many books as fast as Donnie. And so seeing him, who is sort of my aspirational figure as far as output goes, say that, oh, it's hard and it's an ongoing process, it makes me feel a little bit better, and it sort of gives me it makes me feel a little bit like, okay, I can keep refining this process over the years. But yeah, just the weird spot that I'm in now is, honestly, it's just I have a lot of projects that are written, and it's just very slowly kind of getting the ball down the hill as far as getting them drawn and getting them shopped and getting them picked up and getting them released. And that's not a problem I thought I'd have 2 years ago. I do
That's a
feel
good
like
problem to have, right?
It's a good problem to have, but
Yeah.
I think COVID's made COVID's made it hard. I think finding teams, like I was talking.
Absolutely, I can only imagine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who would have been up and coming kind of got scared out of the business, and I get it. Like, you have to live, you have to pay your rent, you have to eat. And so there's a lot of people who have said, well, I'd rather not do comics. I'd rather do a Patreon, or rather just live on commissions, because they're easier. I can make as good of money drawing easier stuff, and not have to deal with the rigmarole of having to figure out the sequential pages, or having to deal with a writer, especially one who might be as particular as I am. And so it's been like finding a needle in a haystack. I was talking about this YA project that I'm working on, for example. I've had it written for about a year, and it's been trying to find the right artist. And I've worked with a couple of people who, they were really wonderful artists who it wasn't the right fit for the book. And, even now it's sort of, I'm working with a new artist. It took me forever to find them. And I love the character designs, but we'll see how the pages look, And so it's very,
right.
I think it's easy to take for granted, especially on the outside. You see these creative teams click together, and it's really hard to find it. I always say online dating was like the best practice for me to becoming a comics writer, because it encapsulates the casting process and the shopping process so well, is that it really is a numbers game. And you kind of have to figure out like who feels like a good fit, and that can be a really time.
You don't have that dating algorithm to help you though.
Yeah. As an OK Cupid alum, you learn quickly to build a little bit of a thicker skin, and you learn that it's numbers.
And I think that's something that, as a reader, we don't really see all the ins and outs. Like, we see the finished product, right?
Right.
Maybe with some Kickstarters, you might see like the process, the panels, but like, we don't really ever see the process of like, how did this team even come together in the first place? Because, you got to get your artist, your inker, your colorist, your letterer. You got to put all those pieces in place.
Yeah.
And, it's a lot that goes into it that we don't ever really get to see.
Yeah. For me, it's a lot of looking around on Twitter. I wind up, I've been fortunate. I always tell people, there are a lot of people who hit me up who say, I want to be a comics writer. Sometimes it's Hollywood people, and sometimes it's like students. And then I always say, usually it's like, well, it's going to cost you. It will cost you a decent amount of money. And I can almost guarantee you that in your first book, you will not make it back. It's just an expensive calling card for more work down the line. But once you get a first book, it's a lot easier to say like, hey, this is the kind of books I do. And you can say like, I'm a serious person trying to make a serious book, or sometimes I'm not serious book. But yeah, it's still a process. I mean, sometimes it's sort of the creative stars don't align. Sometimes, the creative attitudes don't align. Sometimes, life kind of crushes people. Sometimes not in ways you like. I've had artists who I've paid money for, and they flake out. That always sucks. And you just kind of have to say, well, this is almost the price of doing business. And you just say, well,
Right.
That's where it comes down to: do you believe in the book? Do you believe in the concept? Do you believe in the characters? And I'm fortunate, as a creator-owned person, that I don't have to work on anything I don't believe in. And I make it a point that if this thing goes the distance that I've sort of done an outline, and I've come up with characters, I can only think of one concept that I've done where I've built the whole outline and I didn't fall in love with them and I didn't pursue it. So I feel like I've been really fortunate. Yeah. And who knows, maybe someday that book will see the light of day. I feel like it overlapped in a few other things that I think I did a better job at Scouts Honor and the OZ. But never say never. If I, maybe if I'm running out of ideas, something like that, I'll bring that one.
Right, an art writer's portfolio page.
Yeah,
back up one day.
Yeah.
Now tell us a little bit more about Burn After Reading. What is that all about?
That was fun. So Marcus Jimenez, who he's running a publisher called Dauntless Stories, and they popped up on my radar because my Going to the Chapel artist Gavin Guidry did a story with him, or I should say, I think it was a graphic novel called Deadly Living. And Gavin is such an underrated talent, just really, really terrific, very expressive with his characters. I thought that's the reason why I brought him for Going to the Chapel. Is he can bridge that gap between stylish and funny very, very easily and naturally. And so watching Marcus lately, he's been doing a lot of one-page stories with a lot of different creators. I saw him with Brent Harshman and Joan O'Deener, who are two buddies of mine on Twitter. And I'm always the thing I love about comics is the structure and the form inform so much of the story. You only have 20 to 22 pages, and you can only fit a certain number of panels per page. And the way that you lay out your panels can really be instructive in how your stories go. I talk about the third issue of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run on Batman, where like Batman is like drugged out and underground, and he's like on the run from the Court of Owls, and the panels start to like
where you actually have to turn the book,
and you have to turn the book.
Yeah, we talked about that today. You have to turn the book around. Yeah,
that was a very influential comic for me, and so seeing Marcus do all these interesting things with one page, I thought, okay, like what can I do with one page? And so. I was kind of tinkering with it a little bit, and Burn After Reading you could read it on my Twitter. It's one page, so it's hard not to do spoilers. But I thought, what if a lot of times people do narrative captions. What if I did it as sort of a twist on a second person narrative, where it's not just the narrator talking to you, it's the narrator giving you orders. And so this is sort of my riff on a James Bond story, where my James Bond figure, his name is Travis West. He's a super spy who's carrying some very deadly, sensitive information, and he's killed in the line of duty. But as we find out, in his last moments, the secrets he was holding was how to telepathically download an operative's brainwaves to a nearby passerby. And so I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's a little bit of the Grant Morrison multiversity, that cursed comic idea that he had, having that in one page of sort of, oh no, like you have a super spy digging around in your brain, and he'll pop up whenever the time is right. I was like, that's kind of a cool twist on a one pager. And so, Marcus was terrific. And he brought in AHG Colors to do the colors, and he did a terrific job on it as well. But yeah, it's funny. I feel like anthologies, they get a bad rap, I think, in comics a lot of times. I think a lot of times
I'm personally a huge fan of anthologies, so
yeah. Well, and I think for me, looking at it just in terms of utilitarian, that's how a lot of companies break in their writers. They break them in with 1-pagers, they break them in with 8-pagers, which is why I did Die Die Danger Ronin for the Nightmare Theater Horror Anthology. I was like, I can do 8 pages, and it's sort of superhero and it's sort of horror, and I kind of get to play around with as many different things as I can. Yeah, so it's just the fact that Marcus was like basically saying, I'll do a free 1-page anthology. I was kind of like, well, yeah, I'm sold. Like, I feel like that's a good way to kind of flex some muscles and kind of build extra into my portfolio. And I'm really thrilled with how it came out. And the fun thing about some of these anthologies is maybe they'll take on a bigger life someday, or maybe they'll translate into something else later down the road. I know Roxy Rewind that I did with George Santiago Jr. In the Big Hype anthology. We've talked about possibly doing a full mini for that character. Roxy's been a character that I've had in my head since before Spencer and Locke. And so, being able to sort of plant that creative flag and say, well, Roxy exists, and, people can read the story, and if they like it, we can do more of it down the road. That's a really useful thing, I think, for these anthologies. I do have another anthology story coming. I think it's coming out next year. I'll say who it's with. I'm working with Mon House. This is the first interior work that I've done with him. But he's such a terrific and gifted artist. I love working with him. And it's a fun little bit of genre mashups that I can't reveal just yet. But after the show, I'll tell you guys what it is. Just remind me.
Nice. Now, speaking of genre mashups, like that seems to be something you really enjoy doing. I mean, let's even look at Spencer and Locke. You've got this dark, gritty crime noir, and throw in an imaginary friend. It's just like, so you got this whimsical dark noir. So like, is that something that in general, like, is that something you just enjoy? Like, when you consume media, do you like those media that kind of like amalgam two different things?
I'm always, I think that's my go-to method at this point, is I'm always trying to figure out, like, throw a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B together and kind of see what happens. I think it's an interesting way to come up with stories. It's an interesting way to come up with something that seems very different, but still recognizable. It certainly helps as far as, trying to sell a book to a reader, saying, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? Find out in Spencer and Locke. That is sold. That is sold a couple thousand copies.
I love it.
But yeah.
Well, you also had 5 Ringo nominations for that, which is incredibly impressive. Congrats on that, by the way. That is, I mean, you're Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel. Those were 2 of your first projects, correct?
Yeah, those are Spencer and Locke 2, and Going to the Chapel were my first 3 books. Yeah, it's I couldn't be more blown away, especially with the response to the first volume. I mean, I felt like the little indie that could as we were coming out. But I'm always kind of trying to figure out, like, what's the like Reese's peanut butter cup of it all? Like, what's the chocolate and what's the peanut butter, or what's the pineapple pizza? That I can find out of this. Just unexpected mashups. I joke that, like, the concepts I come up with are usually like trash concepts that people are very skeptical about, and then they read it and they're crying by the end of the book. And it's sort of, it's like my prank that I'm pulling on all my readers, except it's like a good prank that they're like happy with, is that, like, I mean, if I can tell you, I knew as the guy pitching What If Calvin and Hobbes Grew Up in Sin City, that's a questionable high concept. It's
I don't know if anyone out there listening right now hears Calvin and Hobbes and Sin City in the same sentence and doesn't want to go pick up that book, then I don't know what to tell you. Like,
they're interested.
That is just like fascinating to me.
Unsubscribe right now. Get out of here.
It's interesting in the same way that like a car accident could be interesting. Like people are gonna look because they have to know. Like, well, is everybody okay? Like, did they make it out alive? And that's usually how all my high concepts are. Is people look because they're like, oh, is this guy gonna make it out alive? And thankfully, like like any stunt professional, I'm checking my marks. Like I'm making sure, like, is this something I can actually hit? And if I don't, it's you'd be surprised that, like, I think because all of my high concepts come out sounding very outlandish, people don't realize, like, there are things that are like 10 times crazier that I've like nixed because I'm like, oh, there's no way I can pull that off. There's no way that this is not going to blow up in my face.
Like basically like, oh, if you think this thing that I actually was able to make work is crazy, wait until you hear the things that I cut off the top.
But I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
like,
Die Danger
the
Ronin,
original pitch.
you've got basically Power Rangers meets Walking Dead.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So that book, that was an interesting anthology. So I'm buddies with Dave Schrader and Clay Adams, the organizers of the Nightmare Theater anthology. They worked with a lot of local Los Angeles comics creators on that book. And at the time, I wasn't going to do it. I hadn't written any horror before. This is my very first horror story. And I'll tell you guys a sort of a dirty secret as far as how that went, which is I have always wanted to write an Archie horror book. Always. I bugged poor Alex Segura over at Archie quarterly to be like, is there any openings for Archie horror? Is there any openings for Archie horror? I feel really bad for Jamie Rotante over at Archie because now that she's like senior editor, once she settles in, I will be bugging her quarterly about is there any openings for Archie horror. And
Segura just moved up.
Yeah, I said to myself, well, I said I wanted to do horror and teenagers, and I was like, you know what? And let me throw in a superhero thing because also I would love to write for Marvel or DC someday, and I would like to show them that I can do a superhero story. And that Venn diagram all kind of came together as I was like, oh, Power Rangers versus The Walking Dead. And I was really fortunate that I got to work with Erica D'Urso on that story. You might know her for her recent Kickstarter, Inferno Girl Red, which is a spinoff of Radiant Black over an Image. I was really lucky to work with Erica. She is a terrific artist, and I keep telling her, I say, whenever your schedule opens up, like, let me know, you can take your pick of whatever projects I've got in the works. But I have the feeling that Erica's star is going to be on the rise for quite some time, outside of little people like me. But seeing her and the way that Roche, our colorist, did the colors, they worked together on James Bond. And so Erica recommended Roche wholeheartedly. And I love Roche. He's such a sweet guy. His color work is just superb. He's actually, this is not a huge spoiler, Roche is doing colors on one of our OZ covers for the second Kickstarter, and it looks just astonishingly good. But it was just,
excited to see that one.
I think Danger Ronin also speaks back to one of my big influences back in the day. Joseph Kahn, who is a music video director. He's done a lot of stuff with Taylor Swift. He did a short film, a short Power Rangers film, where it was sort of a dystopian future. It had James Van Der Beek in it. It had I'm
yes, I've seen that. Yep. Okay.
But the woman from Battlestar, Trisha Helford, is that her name? Anyway, I saw that shortly after I was out of college, and it really left a big impression on me. Between that, Afterlife with Archie, all these things, seeing the gritty pop culture thing and finding like a through line through it that's emotional and makes sense and isn't just exploitive. That really stood out to me in a big way. And I can tell you, this is a fun little behind the scenes tidbit. He wound up not being available for it, but I was really thrilled. We at one point had approached Joseph Kahn to see if he wanted to do an adaptation of Spencer and Locke. And it kills me that he wasn't available for it because, he would have been really, really fun with it. But just Danger Ronin was a fun way to come full circle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just find a way to be like, seeing what happens to these Power Rangers. What does it mean to save the world at the fullest extreme? And in this case, when there's a zombie apocalypse and there's no going back, how do you save the world? Well, you stop it from happening to any other world. And so seeing the way that Erica and Roche and Justin Birch, our letterer, sort of realized that, I'm very proud of that short. It's my favorite anthology story I've done so far. We'll see if Monhouse can raise the bar further with the story we're working on next. Yeah,
that's exciting. Now, you said you're working on a bunch of different things, like 9 different projects. Is there any one or another that you're most excited for us to, get wind of, to kind of announce?
Well, I'm certainly excited for Grand Theft Astro. I can't wait for people to get to see that. Just because I love how the story kind of came together, and it really marries a lot of stuff that I love already. Heists and family dynamics and sibling rivalry, with like a really cool like sci-fi high concept to it. My YA story that I'm getting the character designs in for is a very personal story for me. And when it comes out, I think people will understand why. But I've been so sick of not having anything that a child could read on my table that like this has been like a priority, an ongoing priority for a long time. And I think I have fingers crossed if the pages look as good as the character designs are looking. This is going to be one of the most beautiful books I've ever worked on, which is going to be crazy. And it's going to, again, be something that you can show to your kids. You can read as an adult. It's going to be, when I say all ages, I mean all ages can read and enjoy this book. What else am I working on that's really fun? Actually, this crime book that I'm working on right now has been long overdue. I'm really thrilled. An editor that I really respect asked me to flesh it out, so I'm doing that right now. And that really touches upon a lot of sort of the family dysfunction and the heists, and all that kind of cool stuff. It's my attempt at an Ocean's 11, without spoiling too much.
Nice.
But yeah, and then horror. I'm really excited to get into horror. I have a horror book that it's sort of slowly but surely coming together. I have the first issue written, and I'm sort of waiting on art to come back before I dive deeper into it. But horror feels like the missing food group right now, and so I'm really excited to kind of finally get a horror thing out the door. And I've got a few horror things that whichever hits first, I'll feel really, really good about it. But
I think you're getting onto that train at a good time too. I mean, horror seems to be the big genre right now. Lot of horror books out there, and a lot of different variety of horror books.
Yeah, it's just, I get it. Like, I think it's you don't have to. It makes sense. Horror as a concept, like, I think it's a challenge to do it in comics where the reader's in control of the reading experience and the tempo of it all. You don't get to do jump cuts. But I do think as a genre, it's almost clearest in intent, and as I've been writing horror, I'm kind of realizing like, it's sort of it's the opposite number of comedy, which I know like that seems very obvious, but like having written it was kind of a big eye opener. Comedy, you have to write that the story adds up, the plot makes sense, the characters pop, but it all has to be funny. And I feel like it's the exact opposite in horror, where you're like, well, the concept has to work and the characters have to pop up, but you have to like find scenes that are like threatening or scary, and you have to kind of keep injecting it in the mix. And so it's been a fun challenge to kind of learn how to do that, especially in a first issue where things are still kind of building up. I'm very, a lot of fun stuff is coming. And I think, my 2021 is almost over. We'll have the OZ, the second issue out by the end of the year, but I don't have any other projects out this year that I'm aware of. But I think 2022 and 2023 are going to be very busy, and you're going to be seeing a lot more stuff with my name on it, both in the direct market and on Kickstarter. And I can't wait. I want the time travel now. I just want to see these books finished, so I can read that.
That's very exciting. I think there's hope for you with that horror Archie book too. I mean, they were able to somehow pump out 2 volumes of Archie versus Predator. So
Archie versus Predator, yeah.
I think there's hope for you there.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Honestly, I don't know if they would let me do it. It's one of the many things on the list, but I was like, I want to do Archie versus Aliens versus Predator.
Oh man, I love that. I love that idea.
We'll see what happens, but yes, I pray for Archie, because they're going to be hearing from me sooner rather than later.
Knocking on the doors, huh? That's how you got to do it, though.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll give Jamie and Ron a few weeks to settle it, and then that'll be the first thing I do is hey guys, remember me? Got any room for any horror? I'll pitch you anything.
Hey, it's me again. The Baskin Robbins of comics. Just want to add another flavor to my menu.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So anyways, with Scouts Honor, just with the success of that, does that lead you to want to do more work? Because you started out, both Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel were with Action Lab, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yep. So then you've done work with Aftershock, and I know you mentioned earlier, you'd love to get back to DC and do a superhero story.
100%. I'd love to do. Honestly, I'd love to do Shazam.
Okay. I was just gonna ask, what would be your dream project over at DC?
Yeah. Well, besides the Justice League, because I would love to do the Justice League. I do love these characters, and I feel like Grant Morrison's run was like seminal for me, and I feel like Scott Snyder and James Tynion and Josh Williamson did some interesting stuff with their No Justice run. I'd love to tackle that, but if I'm not cheating, I would love to do either Shazam or the Flash. I feel like those would be really fun, interesting characters. But Billy Batson is like probably my favorite superhero concept in like all of superheroes. I could write Billy Batson stories for like 10 years and I would not run out. I think he represents a lot of the stuff that I like most about my writing. Don't get me wrong, like there's the gritty concepts that feel like subversive and like kind of fun to like get people invested in, but there's the redemptive arc. And that's the thing that stands out to me the most about Billy, is that like, at risk of sounding a little blasphemous, I don't like Billy Batson as being like a terrible kid, and I know that's been like the way he's been characterized.
I like the wide-eyed, innocent, like good, like pure heart Billy Batson. To
me, he's Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes, that is such a good comparison.
And he's got the power of Zeus and the wisdom of Solomon, but the thing that's holding it together is he's just a good kid. That like you could give this to somebody like Teth Adam and he would go bad because he's been, he's just, the world has ground him down as an adult. And so he just can't handle that power. And Billy is just, excuse me, he's a good kid. He's got a good heart
Yep.
and a good head on his shoulders. And so I feel like that would be such a fun series to write, watching Billy kind of learn the things that we all learn. Things from learning to drive a car to his first kiss to what happens when you confront death. Sort of filtering through that super heroic man. So I'd love to write Shazam. And then the Flash is like, a second place for me. I love I think all the crazy sci-fi stuff.
With the Flash, Barry or Wally?
I could make either work. I mean, I love Wally. Wally's the Flash I grew up with. There's part of me that's like, without doing like a full reboot of Wally, he's like a hard character to work on right now. And on top of that, like, how do you do better than what Mark Waid has already done with that character? Whereas I feel like Barry, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. Barry feels like enough of a blank slate that you could do something really interesting with him.
Right.
Like the same way that like that Jeff Johns kind of recast Hal Jordan as sort of a Chris Pine, Captain Kirk type. I think there is room for that with Barry Allen. And I've got a take on him
point.
I've got a take on him that I think would be really fun, and really inject a lot of energy to him and really speak to kind of the Silver Age sci-fi weirdness of the character, while sort of putting it in like a very modern lens. I think honestly, seeing the way that Jason Aaron wrote the Blur this week in Heroes Reborn, if you liked that was very much in line with the kind of thing that I would want to do in the Flash. So I saw it and I was kind of like, oh man, like I hope Jason's not trying to make a pass for the Flash right now at DC, because I don't know what I do. But I certainly think it's my favorite thing that Jason's written in quite some time. And it just shows that the Flash is just an inherently interesting and fun character. And I'd love to write him someday. We'll see what the powers that be say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, you keep on going the way you are. I think that people will be clamoring to get you writing for them. So
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It's one of those things. I always say, I mean, first off, look, if people want me to write for their favorite publisher, feel free to tweet your favorite publisher, say that you like me and that you want me to work with them, because that really does help. I swear. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, I don't mind taking my time a little bit with my creator-owned work. You see, again, we talked about Donny Cates earlier, and that was exactly him. That was not an overnight success for that guy. He toiled in the trenches for a long time, working on creator-owned stuff that barely got any buzz, if at all. And it was all those years of hard work, and then God Country kind of was the spark that lit the fuse. And I feel like as a result, he had the skills already to take on a book like Venom and be able to sort of navigate some of the pitfalls that I think a newer writer wouldn't, or a newer writer might, be given a note from editorial and take it the wrong way, in a way that might be detrimental to the story, that Donnie had the experience to be able to navigate.
Right.
And so, I want to be like that. And so, being able to say, I've seen people who have, catapulted to the big two after one book, and it's taken some time for them to find their feet. And sometimes they don't find their feet and they wash out. And that's, I don't want to watch. So, if
the way it kind of seems, something that's popping into my head, it's almost like, say you're a carpenter, and it's like you're collecting these tools in your tool belt, a hammer, a screwdriver, a measuring tape. And, 100%. Once you have all those tools, you go to build this big house and you're prepared for it.
Exactly.
Rather than like, you got like a hammer and a measuring tape, like you can do something with that. But like having more tools, exactly, having more of those tools in your belt is helpful.
And having that following and having that fan base that can come with me. I think I don't want to be the guy who thinks he can run before he can walk. And so, I've had conversations with editors, and some of them have been very, very encouraging. But it's one of those things. If it's meant to happen, it'll happen, and it'll happen when it's meant to happen. And I feel like that's the thing I almost don't want. I don't want to force that, because I want, if and when I ever get to write for the big two, or if and when I ever get to write something licensed that I really like. I talk about Captain Planet all the time. That's like my IP white whale.
Oh man, if you could make a Captain Planet book happen, I would be eternally grateful.
I would love to write Captain Planet. It would be like Avatar: The Last Airbender meets the first Avengers movie with like a geopolitical, like timely environmental message. That's a concept
that is just begging to be done. It is the perfect time to have a book like that.
Every time I talk to a publisher, I ask them if they have the rights to Captain Planet. Every time, because
now,
I say,
who does have the rights to Captain Planet?
I don't know.
I'm just curious.
That's very interesting.
I feel like I thought it was somewhere in the Warner Brothers umbrella, but nobody really knows. And Ted Turner personally spearheaded it, so it's going to be. There's a reason it hasn't been made into multimedia, and I think it's because Ted is very protective of the concept.
Yeah, and I mean that's understandable.
But I feel like there's a lot that can be done with it, and I've got a pitch that I think would a lot of people be very excited with. So hopefully,
I think I was just talking on Twitter the other day. Like, why have we not gotten any sort of Captain Planet movie since we got that? I think we got that Don Cheadle short, 20 years ago now. But that's it.
Well, yeah, I think they've been really protective with the rights. Leonardo DiCaprio was developing something once upon a time. I don't know if that's still a thing. It did not sound very good. It was about a sad middle-aged Captain Planet, which nobody wants that. No, I just want to
I did hear about that, but I haven't heard nothing about that in a long time.
Yeah, I just want to put a shiny new coat of paint on it. It's inherently diverse. It's inherently international. There's a lot of it was ahead of its time. I think now you can just speak to it as of today. I mean, it's sort of it talks a lot about geopolitics and environmentalism and capitalism, and I think there's a lot of cool things you could do with it. And I think you don't have to do much to make these characters relevant. So
right, that's exactly what I mean. Like the time is now. Like you look around at what's going on in the world, and it's the stories would almost write themselves. The stories are being written around us every day.
Yes. So I talked to every publisher about it, and nobody's gotten the rights yet that I'm aware of. But every time I talk to an editor, I always say,
it looks like he's under Warner.
Yeah, it's
looks like it's a TBS, so it'll be Warner.
One day.
It brings me hope knowing that you're out there at least pounding the pavement, trying to get it out there. It makes me happy to know that there's someone out there trying to make this happen. So that's something.
Well, yeah. Honestly, if you gave Captain Planet full pants, that would be 80% of the time. Just give him pants and just trim the mullet a little bit, and the job is mostly done.
Yeah, exactly. D90s him a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Do we have a special guest over there, Wes?
Yeah, she's chatting away at me.
That's
what does she think about Captain Planet?
Yeah, I don't think she has any clue who Captain Planet is.
And that's exactly the problem right there, is that there's no Captain Planet for the younger generation. That's funny.
She could name the entire Justice League, but no Captain Planet.
Hey,
well done, Wes. That's pretty good, though, Wes. I'm proud of you. All right. Let's see what we got here.
The engine got explode.
There.
All right. So, David, you're out in California, right?
I am.
Nice.
Sunny LA.
Now, with life kind of, with vaccinations rolling out and everything like that, is life kind of easing up out there? How's real life going for you?
It's going. I thankfully will be fully vaccinated on Tuesday. So that'll be a big relief. I mean,
Nice.
thankfully, my girlfriend and I both work from home. We did well before the pandemic, so we've been kind of prepared already for a lot of it. With a move, it's been a little challenging. Just kind of, we're having to figure out how to live in like a brand new space and one that's certainly a bit bigger than what we've been used to. And having a new puppy, I mean, you probably heard her at some point barking because she doesn't quite understand how wind works.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it's there's part of me there's part of me that's still like figuring out how to like ease back into normalcy, figuring out conventions, for example. I believe, unless I have it wrong, I think my first con back, I'm going to Rose City in Portland in a couple months. And I applied for New York and I applied for Emerald City. So, we'll see how those go. And I'm pretty sure I might be up for Baltimore again this year. I got to double check. Getting back to like the convention circuit is certainly going to be a learning curve. And I want to make sure the thing during COVID, I hunkered down a lot. I wrote, I think 4 books during COVID. My momentum kind of got slowed down a little thanks to Ruby because, she's a baby and she's, trying to eat stuff and she's trying to steal stuff. But I don't want to lose that momentum. I do feel like there was a point I was doing 15 shows a year. And then I was suddenly like, well, why am I not getting as much writing done as I'd like to? And it's like, well, it's because you live half your life in jet lag. So I want to be a little easier with how I do that. Pick my battles a little bit better. But I think, LA it's as safe as most places are at this point. Our numbers are, I think, leveling out, which is really good. The fact that like my in-laws are staying with us.
That's exciting. I saw you posting about that the other day.
Yeah,
that is, it's almost weird to even like plan something like that these days. It's like, the in-laws are coming. I haven't had to deal with that for a while.
We haven't seen them since just before COVID. We took sort of an impromptu trip home. We're both from St. Louis, and so we took an impromptu trip home about 2 weeks before everything shut down. And it's kind of we haven't seen them in over a year, so it's a nice little bit of return to normalcy, as normal as things can be. But I think everybody's kind of figuring out the new normal. You certainly see it in the comics industry. I think everybody's kind of, the acquisitions pipelines have certainly tightened a bit. Everybody's kind of staggering out work that was supposed to come out a year ago.
Well, I mean, you think back a year ago, comics weren't even coming out. Because that would have been about. Did Scouts Honor get delayed by that at all?
No, actually, we were really fortunate. We had no delays on that book. What happened? I pitched that book in 2019. I guess it was August of 20. It was Fan Expo Boston is when I got the email saying let's flesh this one out, and then I think I got the green light officially around Christmas of 2019, but Aftershock was updating its contracts, and so I got my contract when I was in St. Louis 2 weeks before everything shut down.
Okay.
And so we were off to the races. I give Aftershock a lot of credit. They did not say pencils down ever during this project, which was a real relief because I was hearing a lot of other publishers saying pencils down. And yeah, it's just it's it was just the timing was very weird, and I mean, just it took a certain amount of time. I think we got Luca on board March or April of last year, and he finished drawing the book maybe November or maybe December. I mean, it was by end of the year, and so it was just, and again, I think this speaks to, because my editors are ex-Marvel editors, there was certainly a more piecemeal element of the production side. So, for example, we had inks for months, but because Matt Miller, our color, writing into a lot of Marvel books, it was like we would sort of get an issue at a time, and it would really be kind of like Matt would be working on whatever projects Matt was working on, and he'd be like, "Yeah, I have a week to do Scouts Honor," and he would like crank out like a whole issue's worth of inks in a week. They would look amazing, or I'm sorry, colors in a week. They'd look amazing, and then I'd be like, "Well, I'll hear from Matt again in about a month," and we'd have some early lettering on it from Carlos, but like we wouldn't freak out too much about it because we'd be like, well, we're still waiting for the colors. So once we get the colors, we're finally get Carlos the final note. So it was like a very stop thing at the end, which is, in certain ways, it was like very anxiety inducing for me, because I was kind of like, oh man, like I know we're not going to miss deadline. Like I know Mike and Christina will not let that happen, but I was kind of like, oh, like the books never click for me until I see the whole thing together.
Right. So you're kind of always like in the wind, almost like waiting for that to all click together, and then you can breathe that sigh of relief.
Yeah, like I'm like, did it work? Because oftentimes, you see the line art, and you're like, well, that looks fine, and then you'll see the lettering come, and you're like, okay, I think we've made it, but I'm not sure. And then you see the colors and letters together, and you're like, oh, okay, the whole thing came together. Everybody really kind of elevated each other in a nice way, and it did click. But you feel like you're holding your breath. And usually it's my previous books, it's all been very tight, where it's already sort of one after the other. But that's because I've worked with people. This is their only project. And that was sort of, I think, my big learning curve, is like working with a colorist like Matt Miller or a letterer like Carlos Manuel, who are juggling a lot of other projects the same way that I am, figuring out like, oh, okay, there's like an art to like weaving together everybody's schedules. So I don't envy Christina or Mike one bit. I thought the editing that I do on my own, creator own stuff, was hard, but seeing the way that they've got a daisy chain all our wild schedules together, they deserve medals, all of them.
And then you think about that they're editing, multiple projects at once with multiple teams on them. So that's another part of comics where I feel like they're a little bit of an unsung hero. It's the editors behind the scene, and they're there's a lot of people don't pay attention to how comics are made, and to me, it's something that's fascinating because it's easy to enjoy the finished project, but what about everything that went into it? I find enjoyment, hearing about all that,
It's something I was always interested in. I mean, from my time as a DC intern to my time working in comics journalism, I've always been curious. It's like, how does this work? And I said when Spencer and Locke came out, 10 years of being a reviewer was just barely enough to get me across the finish line for Spencer and Locke. Barely enough to get me across the finish line. And I mean, I think you learn by doing. There's only so much you can learn academically before you got to put it into practice. And so I think making comics has been very educational for me. And sometimes it's very stressful, but I think ultimately the thing I always say is like, once the book comes out, it's always worth it. And it's all the stress and pain of like having kids, except not nearly as stressful or as painful. But it's if you remembered how stressful and painful it was, you'd never have another kid again. But you see it, and
it's a true labor of love. I don't feel like anybody is writing comics because they're like, I have to do this. Most people that are in the comics industry, whether it be writing or drawing or inks or whatever it may be. It's because you love the art form.
Yeah.
You know, you do it because you love it.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So I'm plugging in my laptop. But yeah, it's just you do it. There's if you don't love comics, I'm shocked if you make a comic, but even then, it's like maybe you'll make two. You know, like if you don't like this is a business that is hard to do if you don't love it. And thankfully, you know, I mean, I grew up in this business. You know, I'm a third generation comics fan. My grandfather was a comics reader. My mother was a comics reader. You know, I remember my first issue of comics. It was Amazing Spider-Man 376. David Michelini and Eric Larson, Spider-Man versus Venom. You know, it's been my passion my whole life, and so I consider it really just such a privilege, and I'm so grateful to be able to have done what I've done already. And whenever I'm having a bad day, that's kind of what I tell myself is like, I can't believe you made it this far, and that really kind of gives me the second wind I need to push myself for what's coming next.
Well, you know, that I've seen you post before, you know, people post like their hauls for the week. You know, these are the comics I picked up this week. And you'll retweet a lot of them and be like, wow, what great company to be in. Like, you know, and you're seeing your book up there, you know, next to who knows what else, you know, you got, you know, Firepower or something like that with like Chris Samney. And it's just like, you know, that's got to be like such a rewarding feeling. It's just like, wow, there's a book that I helped make next to all these other titles, and these, like, look at all these people reading it. Like that would just be like make it all worth it.
It really does. You know, I feel like comics, it's a person by person business. You know, I feel like the day you stop remembering individuals reading your books, as long as they're not being jerks. I mean, you know, jerks you can forget whatever. But you know, I think if you stop forgetting, you know, that individual people are reading your books and individual people are supporting you, then you know you've kind of lost the thread, I think. And look, like I see people like, you know, Scott Snyder, for example. You know, this is a guy who's written Batman for a decade, and he's still, you know, responding to people's tweets. You see it with Tom Taylor. You see it with Tom King. You know, these are people who are very busy. Who, like, I can't imagine their mentions in Twitter anything other than a wasteland. You know, but I see it as like aspiration. You know,
right?
I'm kind of like, these guys are grateful to their fans, you know, because, you know, without people supporting us, you know, we're just in an echo chamber, you know, and that's the thing that I've been really grateful and thankful for is that, you know, I certainly don't have the biggest readership in the world, and nor should I expect it. You know, I haven't written anything like Batman or Justice League or Spider-Man or the Avengers or what have you. But I think for an indie guy, I've got a really like vocal and loyal fan base. And what's been so interesting to me is seeing new people pop up because there's something about something I've written recently that speaks to them. There was a really lovely piece on Comics XF this week from Kat Purcell talking about her time in the Boy Scouts as a woman and how Scouts Honor really spoke to her and her life, and how she was like, I don't know David Pepose, but I've never met him, but I felt like he was writing my life. And that is such a huge compliment. And being able, you know, I'm fortunate enough that every book that comes out, I get a reader like this, where I tell my girlfriend, like I say, they're the super fans, where they're the ones who like, the book resonated with them, and they are beating the drum every time a new issue comes out. And I like to think that these might be fans for life. You know, they say what it's like. You need 100 true fans who buy everything you do.
Yep.
And then, you know, you're pretty well set. And and just seeing new readers come in who say, oh, hey, like, you know, I read Scouts Honor, I really liked it, and then they go up and they pick up Spencer and Locke, or they pick up.
Well, that's exactly the thing. The people that find a later work and they're like, oh, well, hey, I'm gonna check out this guy's entire, you know, portfolio, And then like I was one of those people, you know, and then I found Spencer and Locke, who like you said, Sin City mixed with Calvin and Hobbes. And for me, my entryway to comics was actually Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield. So, you know, those were like my big comics as a kid.
You're like volume 3.
So like, yeah,
You
exactly.
can see the title. This is on the Aftershock Reddit. It says anyone here reading the series, my go-to local shop doesn't carry the title, but another shop in my town does. Saw the cover for number 3 and it piqued my interest. If you're reading this, how do you like it? And underneath, you've got like 100 comments. All.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, and you know that's where like the Twitter and stuff is really helpful, because I've never been able to interact with the creators that, you know, I enjoy like I have been on Twitter, you know, and like that's a huge tool for writers and just creatives in general to get their work out there, you know. And then, you know, you've got these unsolicited like people pounding the pavement being like, hey, you need to be reading this book, you know, and that's got to be great too, because, you know, then it becomes like a wildfire, and then they get 5 people to read it, and those 5 people get 2 people each to read it, and then you know you got new readers.
Honestly, it feels like the simulation glitches every time I see that happen, because again, this is sort of my time in comics journalism is you're very used to like, is this thing on? Like, is anybody listening? Is anybody this? Right. You know, you post an article and I think this is just the nature of the internet is like, if you get comments, they're usually, well, why did you say that? Like they're always angry comments. It's very rare that you get somebody leaving like a positive comment, like, oh, I like this. And so seeing that on Twitter, like it really fuels me in a big way. And it really encourages me to kind of keep pounding the pavement, and encourages me to keep reaching out to people and keep doing interviews and podcasts like this. Is that I'm kind of like, well, you know, somebody read this, a stranger read this and it resonated with them. And that feels like so trippy to me, especially because there are some writers who all they see are the flaws. And I'm grateful that I'm not one of those. I am one of those writers, though, who knows what the playing field looks like. And I'm like, well, I'm not Donnie. I'm not Ram V. I'm not Kieran Gillen or Jonathan Hickman, you know, I mean, or Al Ewing. I'm like, those guys are smart. You know, I always consider myself like a B writer who's like elevated by like A-list artists. And so seeing that, like the work that I know I can keep improving on, the work that I know that I'm not Al Ewing yet. I'm not Jonathan Hickman yet. And I don't know if I'll ever will be, but the fact that like, I'm going to go to the mat, I'm going to give my best work that I can give. And if that resonates with somebody, that feels like all the blood, sweat, and tears were worth it. Yeah.
I mean, I think ultimately, if you start comparing yourselves to other, then you start to take yourself out of what makes you a writer. Right. You know, it's like, and I think that's really important to like kind of stick to what your strengths are, you know, because if you try to do what others' strengths are, you kind of lose yourself in that process.
Exactly. It's the thing that got me into writing comics in the first place. It was a conversation I had with my dad. I had visited him, I guess it was 6 years ago, maybe even 7. And we went out to our favorite pub that he used to take me to as a kid. And he asked me how things were going at work. I was working at kind of a soul-crushing corporate job at CBS in New York. And he asked me how work was going. And I was like, well, you know, it's work. You know, it pays the bills. But, like, I don't know if I love it. And I don't even know if there's any upward mobility here. And he said, what's the thing that only you can do? And that was the thing that made me realize, like, I'm not the only person who can write, obviously. There's tons of writers. But I'm the only writer who can write the way that I write.
Right.
And so, you know, I think by veering into, you know, people ask like, how do you know your voice? And I don't have a good answer for that, but I think you know what things appeal to you, you know, what themes stick out to you, what you like in a story. You know, for me, I like characters that you can cry over, you know, sometimes you can laugh with, but most times cry over. I like that, I like having characters that kind of torture themselves and realize that like maybe torturing yourself isn't the way to live. I think those are common threads through all my work that like I think a lot of people resonate with, because everybody tortures themselves. Everybody kicks themselves for a shortcoming or something that they feel like they can't achieve, or a failure that they've had in their life. And I think if my stories, if anything, they kind of just they're a reminder you're human and you make mistakes and you can survive them.
I mean, shoot, I mean, you put yourself into a book like the OZ, and you're in this fantasy land where you got, the Tin Man fighting hordes of like flying monkeys, and yet you find yourself relating to the main to the characters, So it's just like to be able to put yourselves in these whimsical fantasy situations and be like, hey, you know what though? I like gravitate towards this because I can relate to this. That to me is really like cool, that you can like, make it relatable, but also make it completely whimsical and out there at the same time.
Yeah. I like I said, I'm trying to have fun, and thankfully, I'm really fortunate, my partner is my first reader. She's really kind of the immediate sounding board for everything. She's not a comics reader, but she's a voracious fiction reader. And I think that kind of helps me ground myself a little bit, and it helps me kind of connect by saying like, does a normal human being understand what I'm talking about? Like, not to disparage comics fans, but would a civilian understand this?
Right.
And if the answer is yes, then it's worth pursuing. It's universal enough that like you can feel an emotional connection. And if the answer is no, then it's too esoteric, and it's going to be a hassle to try to write, and it's not going to come out right. So retool it, figure something else out, or just maybe that's an idea that needs to sit on the back burner, or one that's not ready for prime time. I'll find an idea that is. That's the cool thing about this job, is you never stop running out of ideas.
Right. I mean, for me, a big one that you kind of mentioned, like what a civilian, something I was able to get my fiance to read is The Flintstones by Mark Russell.
Yeah.
And I had kind of written that, it's like, oh, it's the Flintstones, but like then I read it, and that book is one of my favorite books of all time. Just absolutely blew me away that he was able to make me feel the way he did about this universe. It's like the Flintstones. And but yeah, so like, and that one, I gave to my fiance. I'm like, you have to read this. This blew my mind. And she agreed, and she is not a comic reader, but like that was like amazing to me.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's I think that's something that the comics industry sometimes has problems with, is we preach to the choir instead of going out for converts.
Right.
I want converts.
We sometimes tend to like gatekeep ourselves, and then we wonder why we're not getting new readership, and it's like, well, we kind of did it to ourselves,
Yeah, it's either kind of too esoteric for its own good, or it's too self-referential for its own good. And don't get me wrong, like, I mean, I appreciate Jack Kirby as much as the next guy, but like, I don't need to read another Jack Kirby deconstruction. That's just that's going down the drain for that's comics fans trying to impress comics fans. I feel like if I can impress somebody who doesn't read comics, then I think it will broaden the net, because ultimately I love comics reading. Sometimes there's no accounting for taste, everybody. I think every comic has fans. Some of them are really, really great, and some of them are less than great. But if you can get like people who don't read comics, who aren't sort of well versed in this world, to be excited, then that means at least I have two fans.
Right.
So that's double fans. So it's that's how I see it. I see it as existential, and I see all of my work trying to appeal not just to comic readers, but to people who've never picked up a comic.
Right. Yeah, and I think pulling in concepts like the Wizard of Oz and Boy Scouts, that'll do it. Like you're appealing to a wider audience and maybe even creating new comic book fans for the future.
Fingers crossed.
And and then that's kind of cool because then I'm sure to somebody out there right now, you are the first comic they picked up, and 10 years from now they're gonna be like, someone's gonna ask them, how'd you get into comics? Like, oh, like I saw this comic about like people like making a religion around a Boy Scout manual, and I started there, and now I'm reading all these sorts of comics. So I'm sure that's out there. So like that's almost the biggest compliment you can get. Like you got me into comics. So that is a cool demographic to go after.
Yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree.
Yeah. So. Wes, do we have any questions over there, Wes?
No, man, killing them. My computer's spazzing out, so I don't know what the heck that is. But
it wouldn't be an episode without a little bit of technical difficulties. It just wouldn't.
Yeah. But luckily, it's not showing up on the screen or affecting me. It's just on the side, everything's going wild. I don't know what's going on.
No worries.
Yeah,
not affecting the show, so that's good for me.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure. I really cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to join us and talk comics and talk a little bit of life.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if anybody wants to follow me online, they can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. Or they can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/Pep News, or visit my website at davidpepose.com.
Very good. Well, everyone, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me, and have a great rest of the day.
Had a blast.
Thanks, David.
Have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Guys.